Hello and welcome. My name is Layden Rodriguez Casanova, and I'm an artist and co-founder and co-director of Dimensions Variable. I want to welcome everyone to Strange Boundaries, a panel discussion on the work of Brandon Opalka, Coe Lapossy, Jacin Giordano, Loretta Park, and Nicole Doran. Before we begin, I want to invite everyone to join us on January 28th from 6 to 9 p.m. We're going to be having a closing reception for Can I Sit Next to You, which is the current show that's up and that we're discussing with this conversation. And as usual, our doors will be open and you're welcome to come in with a mask. And we hope that everybody can come out. I also want to take a moment to thank the Knight Foundation for all of their support, including a new Night Arts Challenge grant that we received. Super grateful for that. Also, we want to thank the Warhol Foundation and Florida Division of Arts and Culture for their programming support. Super important. I'm going to go into introducing all the artists. I'm going to introduce them one by one and kind of bring them on. And then once we finish with that, we're going to go into all of the artists briefly discussing their practice. And then after that, we'll go into a discussion about the project and the show. So let me introduce the artists. First artist I want to introduce is Brandon Opalka. Brandon works between Colorado and Miami. Brandon studied at the South Tech Education Center, International Fine Arts College at Miami-Dade College. He lived in Miami for over 20 years, and that's where I met Brandon here in Miami. That was before he moved out and left us to move out to Colorado in 2018. Oppalka's work has been exhibited in museums and galleries across the U.S. and abroad, including Super Chief in New York, Laost, Arles, France, Mud Studios, Denver, Colorado, Emerson Dorsch Gallery, Miami, Tomio Koyama Gallery, Tokyo, Japan, Gallery Ernst Hilger in Vienna, Austria, Bass Museum here in Miami Beach, Museum of Contemporary Art North Miami, and Locust Projects. He actually, I think it was a year or two ago, opened a solo project with the collaborative that he works with called FECUAP. And yes, so Brandon is a founding member of FECUAP. It's an artist collective founded here in Miami. He also was a founder and curator of the Co-Worker, a mobile contemporary project space. His work has been reviewed and featured in Art America, the Miami Herald, Art News, and 303 Magazine. And so without further ado, I'm going to bring Brandon on so he can accompany me into introducing the rest of the gang. Hey, Brandon, what's up? You're on mute, I think.
Hello.
There you are. How
Yes.
you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm gonna move on and get everybody on board, but glad to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Next up is Coe Lapossy. Coe Lapossy earned her BFA from Tufts University and the School of the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. They earned a BFA from in studio art, painting from Kent University. Prior to joining the faculty at the University of Memphis as assistant professor, Coe served as a lecturer at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Coe has also been a visiting critic at Smith College, Rhodes College, and Bennington College. They have created site-specific works for Elsewhere Living Museum, Flansburgh Architects Artisan Residency Program, the Boston Center for Arts, Terrain, partnered with CNL Projects in Chicago, and ICOSA Collective Gallery in Austin, Texas. Coe also has exhibited at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, the Howard Art Project, Lesley University, the Museum of Pocket Art, and Penn State University. Coe has been awarded residencies at the Providence Seascape Dunn Shack Artist Residency and Elsewhere Artist Residency in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is a really amazing place. I've been there. It's really, really cool. Let me bring Coe on. And hi. Are you on mute too? Check.
Now
Oh,
you can hear me.
Now I can. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for
And
having us.
like I said before, I love your fireplace in the background.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to next artist. And we're moving on to Jacin Giordano. And Jacin Giordano lives and works with his wife and two children in Western Massachusetts. He received a BFA in painting from Maryland Institute College of Art, Baltimore, Maryland, also where my partner, Francis Trombley, attended, and an MFA from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Giordano has exhibited in galleries, museums, and art fairs throughout the United States and internationally, including the Cordova Sculpture Park and Museum, Lincoln, Massachusetts, Perez Art Museum, Miami, Past Museum of Art, Miami Beach, Fondation Villa de Tri, Ile de sous la Sorgue, France, Frost Art Museum, Foxy Productions in New York, and the Frost, by the way, is also in Miami. Fred Snitzer Gallery in Miami, Auto Zoo in Milan. He is represented in Paris by Gallery Sultana, which is a really wonderful gallery I've also been to. Giordano has taught painting and drawing as an adjunct lecturer at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Giordano is a recipient of the 2020 Adolf and Esther Gottlieb Foundation Support Grant and a 2006 South Florida Cultural Consortium grant. His work is included in the West Collection, Oaks, Pennsylvania, the Rebel Family Collection in Miami, the Deborah and Dennis Show Collection in Miami, and the Perez Art Museum Collection in Miami. Giordano has been featured in the New York Times, Art Forum, New American Paintings, the Boston Globe, Vogue, and other publications. Please welcome Jacin Giordano to join our conversation. Hey, how you doing?
Howdy.
Hey, Jason.
I'm well. Am I being heard or am I
You
muted?
are.
Yes, you are. Thanks for joining us.
Perfect. Thanks for having me.
Sure thing. Let me just bring everybody else on. So Loretta Park is next. Loretta Park works in Boston, in the Boston area, and serves as a visiting assistant professor at Massachusetts College of Art and Design. She holds an MFA from Massachusetts College of Art and Design and a BA from Bowdoin College. Her work has been exhibited at the Umbrella Arts Center, Concord, Massachusetts, Shelter in Place Gallery, Boston, Massachusetts, New System Exhibitions, Portland, Maine, Ray Gallery in Brooklyn, Society of Arts and Crafts, Boston, and the Center for Maine Contemporary Art, Rockland, Maine. Reviews of her work have appeared in Art New England, the Boston Globe, and Korean Daily. Loretta currently works in Boston, in the Boston area, and serves as a visitor. Oh, I already said that. Sorry. Let me bring on Loretta and have Loretta join us. Welcome, Loretta. Hi.
Hello.
Hey. Oh, I love your hat.
Thank you.
The lipstick.
Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here. And finally, Nicole. Nicole lives and works in Chicago. She received an associate's degree in it from the International University of Art and Design in Miami, a BFA with concentration in painting and ceramics from the New World School of the Arts in Miami. In 2020, she received an MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. While living and working in Miami, she attended the Knights Foundation's Art and Research Center, which is part of Institute of Contemporary Art in Miami. It's an alternative school that was set up there by obviously with Knight funding, but Jean Moreno's leads that project. In February 2018, she completed her second solo show at Spinello Projects titled Digital Sham. Her work has been included in shows at the Green Gallery, Milwaukee, and Amherst Museum of Art in Illinois. Please welcome Nicole. Hey there.
Hi. You'll have to bear with me because my voice is pretty hoarse, a little under the weather.
That's quite all right. I'm glad all of you are joining me, and I guess we're ready to. What we're going to do is go into everyone talking about their practice, and they're going to kind of hand off the baton between each other, and then from there we'll talk about the show and stuff. So whoever's going first, let me know. I believe that's Jacin, right?
I'll go first.
So,
Yes.
I'm going to cut out and let you guys do your thing. Jacin, go for it. There is your screen, and I'm gonna just cut out for a little bit. See you later.
Okay. So before I actually start talking about my little bit of the background and overview of my work, I did, on behalf of all of us, the artists in the show, just wanted to say thank you to Dimensions Variable, especially to Francis and Layden for the opportunity to put the show together. And we're grateful for all the support you've given us throughout the process, and just kind of having the confidence to let us put our show together the way we wanted to. And so we really appreciate that. And Devora as well, who throughout the process has had to deal with some frantic emails and weird requests, but has made the whole process of putting the show together generally very smooth, and made it all work quite well in the end, I think. So, and last, we want to thank Evan Garza, who wrote a beautiful, very thoughtful essay about our individual practices, but also drawing the connections to our work and kind of the process of how we came together for this show. So thank you to everybody who's kind of helped us along the way with this exhibition. So to give a little bit of an overview of my work and how I kind of came to the pieces that are included in the exhibition. Can I sit next to you? I want to start with a piece that kind of encompasses a few sort of foundational things that run throughout my practice. This piece called Cloud from 2009, which I made when I was still in Miami before I had moved up to Western Massachusetts. And so for me, I wanted to draw a connection back to Miami a little bit with this show and with this presentation a little bit. So throughout my work, I've been interested in surface, in texture, material, in process, and kind of finding ways to accumulate and layer and incorporate a very kind of labor-intensive, time-intensive process in the way that I make my work. I've always been kind of interested in thinking of paint as a physical object, something that I can literally touch and manipulate, something that becomes very tangible, something I can kind of cut apart, piece it back together in my own way, and generally thinking of paint as object, and sort of drawing connections between a painting as taking up real space, like painting and sculpture, and where those lines kind of meet, or where I can go over those lines. In 2011, I moved up to Western Massachusetts with my wife and my son, who at the time was 6 months old. And so we moved up here. My wife was in grad school, and so Noah and I spent a lot of time kind of hiking, and he was small enough where I could just kind of put him on my little backpack carrier kind of thing, and walk through the woods. And so during these hikes, I really started to kind of just fall in love with the surrounding area, and even started collecting some tree branches that I started using as a material to make some of the first work when we moved to this area. So on the left here, I have a piece called Unravel Painting. And on the right are a series of sculptures I call Harpoons for Hunting Rainbows. So these were kind of made by taking the tree branches that I was collecting and using the tree branches as sort of a stand-in, say for a stretcher bars. But it was kind of a stripped down version of the stretcher bars, or sort of a pre-industrial version before they've been kind of milled and refined, and building frames where they can kind of be these freestanding sort of paintings, and weaving yarn in and around the stretcher bars into these kind of web-like forms where the yarn was standing in for canvas. And I was kind of interested in whether the yarn was, this canvas was kind of coming together or deteriorating and falling apart. And kind of having the work live in that sort of in-between space. And then on the right side, these harpoon pieces, I was using the yarn to sort of wrap the tree branches and sort of encase them in these cocoons of yarn that I feel like using the tree branches as a material in and of itself really started to change the way I was thinking about my paintings up to that point. And so these, the work that's in the show is from a series that I call Cut Paintings. And it's a series that I've kind of continued to come back to and leave, and sometimes I'll work on different bodies of work, but then end up returning to the cut paintings. And they kind of continually evolve and change depending on what's going on, and as far as what's influencing me at that time. So the cut painting series I started originally about 12 years ago, and I returned to it here in about 2014. So after thinking about the Unravel pieces, I started getting interested in these the wooden substructures that would be part of the cut paintings. But early on, they were very thick paintings, and I wasn't necessarily cutting too deep into them. Instead, though, as I kind of continued working with them and had used these tree branches, I really started thinking about the wooden substrate as a stand-in for the branches, as this kind of natural material that could reference roots and bark, and I just became much more aware at the time that I wanted these to deliberately start to be landscape paintings. And so I was using knives and X-Acto knives, acrylic, utility knives to kind of cut into these pieces. And as I started to think about them as landscape paintings, I wasn't really interested in, say, representing a landscape, but they're not literally, objects that you would find outside, but I did kind of think of them as something in between those two things. And the, thinking about the material mix of the acrylic paint on top of these natural surfaces, and kind of the intertwining of that synthetic and natural became really interesting. And so as I kind of continually revisit this cut painting series, I started again last year working back into using this process where I'm pouring several layers of acrylic paint onto these wooden panels, and using the knives kind of started to feel a little bit too violent, a little too nihilistic for where I wanted the work to go. And so last year I started using some wood carving tools, and in a way it kind of changed the whole way that I was started approaching these and thinking about them, because now it was kind of like I was sculpting the paintings, so sort of again playing with this idea of where that line between painting and sculpture is, but also just thinking much more about the paintings as an object in and of itself. And the act of using a carving knife, it felt like I was literally digging into the surfaces, into this kind of terrain, or the ground that was built up into the paintings. So this piece is one of the most recent ones that it's ended up in the exhibition at Dimensions Variable. And so, yeah, I think overall that's kind of a very quick kind of trajectory into the way that my work has developed with this particular cut series paintings. So next I'm going to leave it off and hand over the baton to Coe Lapossy, so you can hear how their work has come together.
Yay.
All right. Thank you, Jacin. I guess I just need to move my stuff around. All right. Oh, I don't need that to be happening. I need a slideshow. Okay. So everyone, let me know if you can't see this. I'm choosing to kind of focus in on one project that has some extensions of itself in our group show at Dimensions Variable. So this is a project that I started, I believe, in 2016. This is from a show at the Boston Center for Arts where I was living in Boston at the time. So this kind of whole body of work has lots of different pieces, performance, installation, and kind of things that to me kind of fall more into a category of like a space between painting and sculpture. So what we're looking at right here is the first iteration of kind of like makes more sense in my mind to think of it almost like a stage that a play is going to happen in, because things keep moving around during the duration of this 3-month show. So this is like the first setup, and it begins with this structure that I have mimicked the dimensions of Donald Judd's stacked sculptures to the left. There are paint bricks in the corner that are made of solid paint that is poured into molds. Kind of takes like, about a month or so to have one at least roughly solidify into a form that I can pop out of that mold. It's just made from recycled paint, house paint, that would have ended up in a landfill otherwise. And that is one half of another form that is taken from the structure of a magician's table. So I think most people kind of are aware of the kind of iconic magic trick of sawing a woman in half. So you have this like two-part table that after that gesture of the illusion of sawing the woman in half is created, that you get the reveal of these two parts of the table wheeling apart from each other. So that's one half of a table that I have the other half on the other side of the wall. And in this installation, there's kind of like a portal through the wall that connects with the table on the other side. So this work has these references to modernism, magicianry, illusionism, and in a later iteration as the stage 4 of this sort of play, these solid paint bricks are put inside this Donald Judd form that is laid down on top of the magician's table, horizontal. It's opened up and used as a casket. The bricks are laid inside, wet paint is poured over them until we get a solid form filling this entire inside of the Donald Judd casket. And that form again is popped open. And then I, with other people, use a 2-man saw to saw segments of that solid mass of paint that is taking the place of the female body in that illusion. We saw that paint mass into segments, and then those segments were installed inside the wall. I call this whole project Meg Sidney Alec, because it is also in dialogue with a play and then subsequent screenplay that is turned into a movie by Craig Lucas, the playwright. And in the movie version, those characters are played by Meg Ryan, Alec Baldwin, and Sydney Walker. There's a body swap that happens in that movie between Meg Ryan and Sydney Walker. So a young bride on her wedding day, Sydney Walker, an old man nearing the end of his life, shows up as a stranger at Alec Baldwin and Meg Ryan's wedding. This mysterious thing happens, all in earnest, kind of like a little bit, in my mind, outside the norms of the typical genre of a body swap that's typically a comedy, and is kind of done in earnest. This body swap between Meg Ryan and Sydney Walker's character, and the rest of the movie plays out in what I think is one of the most subversively queer movies ever made, because no one but me seems to think this movie is queer. So maybe it's just a bad read on my part, but I'm really invested in this idea of something being kind of like where's the sweet spot of subversion, so that something kind of flies under in a mainstream audience's radar and gets to an audience that otherwise does not get mainstream content made for them, does not get their stories told, does not get to feel part of certain stories, or can kind of like connect by way of a thing through a subversive action. And it's curious to me that this movie kind of feels to me like a very subversive action that just like went a little bit too much under the radar, but somehow dinged my subversive sensitivities towards a kind of like a queer narrative exploring what the body brings to identity, what gender brings to understanding of yourself in the world. And what happens in this piece, of course, is like that gesture is employed through like a body swapping between painting and sculpture. So pushing kind of painting in a sculpture direction and pushing sculpture in a painterly direction. This is a mock-up of this piece in another space in which they're beginning to operate more in conversation with the videos that came into the show that we all put together, A Dimensions Variable. So what you're looking at the sidewalls here is actually a projection of video. So still images were taken of the segments of the solid paint form. And I really felt like voice needed to be brought into this project. If nothing more, is like kind of like just like another way in which I could examine and investigate what sort of note we're hitting by including or excluding certain things that kind of like carry biases with them or allow us to form our biases, I guess is a better way to put that. So, you know, like if you just hear someone's voice, I mean, like this conversation comes in terms of like a telephone operator or even like you're going to assume things about someone's gender, age, maybe their origin of birth, and race, and probably all sorts of other things that sometimes we don't even know we're forming these biases or these assumptions about who's talking. There's like so much happening in what we read in a person's voice. So I wanted to push that around a bit and lean into that with bringing kind of an embodiment of the voice into these talking paint bricks. So we'll look at one of those in a little bit and try to get one to play, but this gives like a better explanation of seeing the two-person saw. And this is the one half of the form of the solid paint mass on the magician's table that has been, I think, segmented 3 times here. And this is another view of another installation of a continuation of the performance, which has moved around and activated, I think, about like just a little bit under half a dozen spaces at this time. So there's still that initial paint mask that I made at the Boston Center for Arts still has a segment to it that has not been, a chunk of it that has not been segmented yet. So there's still like the need to kind of like finalize that gesture at another venue that I'm looking for support for that to happen in another iteration. This was at an architecture firm that hosted the installation and performance of this piece. This is an image in the frame here of a still from the movie of Alec Baldwin kissing Meg Ryan's character inside Sydney Walker's body. Yeah, you got it. This is another view of the one of the segmented paint bricks on top of one of the measuring tools that we sometimes use in the performances with my fellow performers to measure how wide that individual segment could be cut. So this is like, instead of a typical unit of measure, is being measured with little drawings of my own fingers. So it's the segments are 3 of my own fingers. These are the very first, this is still images of these little short video clips of the talking paint bricks. These are the first 2 that I made, and I think both of these I actually did make in 2016 in conjunction with the opening at the Boston Center for Arts. And the, well, let's try to watch one of the newest ones that I made for Can I Sit Next to You? Okay. So when this is actually installed in the gallery, this video loops indefinitely. That's the way that they're intended to be seen. The lines of dialogue in particular that you're hearing spoken through this paint brick are from a part in the play where Meg Ryan's character, this is her dialogue, and she is talking about the experience of reflecting on what that moment was like, where this mystical, mysterious, sci-fi perhaps like moment happens where Sydney Walker's character and hers kiss and they swap bodies. So she's saying, you know, all of a sudden she's looking down at her hand and it's his hand on her. And this is a moment that I have seldom, if ever, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen it in a body swap genre through when, you know, it's kind of popularized through the 80s and 90s of kind of this comedic farce. Something that I think is particularly interesting about Prelude to a Kiss is that it does exist in that time period, but takes that genre in a really different space, in a different direction. And this description of this moment of like the actual jarring, wildly disruptive moment of having your whatever spirit mind suddenly exists in another body is I think depicted with like a little bit more accuracy of how that would actually feel for someone than just like I don't know, like I guess if we could think of like Freaky Friday or something where it's like it's just like a moment to have a lot of physical comedy and to laugh at the ridiculousness of it. And that is not at all what's happening in this play, which is why it interests me. And I think that the other thing that feels really important about all of this to me is that I think that like anything that happens in kind of like the pop culture sphere that, you know, known genres take different forms over time and they kind of like morph and embody more of like the whatever cultural zeitgeist of like something of the moment. And while this movie seemed like a slippage out of space, the body swapping genre currently in our time in 2022 right now, I think has changed really vastly and become a space to really talk about the complicated experience of like living in different bodies. I think how different bodies are marginalized in different ways and restricted in different ways, and that genre is being employed to more thoughtful, real world concerns, and not in any way employed as something to laugh at or to kind of have physical comedy. I'm thinking in particular of kind of some of the narratives that we saw happen if people have seen like Lovecraft Country, the TV series. Anyways, we could talk about a bunch of other shows, but the body swapping, the depiction of it is changing. So yeah, I'm super curious about that. If anyone wants to talk about that in the Q&A or ask us some questions about that when we're done, it's something that I'm deeply invested in that I do think is, for me, a part of kind of how I understand even being a part of this show and the interest in kind of us all delving into figuring out how do we respect each other's boundaries and what each of us have really deeply already invested in making of meaning through materials in our work, while also seeing how much we can let go of some of that and kind of mush our work together and be playful about what happens with the materials, and maybe sometimes lose some of the original content that we understood in our work, but hopefully also allow for an opportunity to see things in new ways and to just also have some fun and levity together also while stepping a little bit outside our practices and pushing into what each other are doing. So with that, I'll hand the baton off to Loretta.
Yay. Thanks, Coe. All right. So let me know if things don't show up for you or have any questions. So I think like this is actually a still image from one of the animation pieces I made in the beginning of fall. I think as Layden introduced in the beginning, I'm also a teacher. I'm teaching at Mass Art. And one of the things that I've been really thinking about, I think since the pandemic, but also now I'm kind of teaching in person and remote, is this idea of like, how do we make work in limited capacity? And that capacity might be mentally, physically, like we might be exhausted or not having space to make, not having materials to make, not being able to afford tools and materials. So this is just kind of a still of me after first day of in-person teaching, and I turned it into an animation. So I thought it'd be an appropriate beginning image to introduce my work and practice. So this piece called Lunch Plate is actually in the show at Dimensions Variable. Can I sit next to you right now? And it's the way I think about titling, the way I think about my work when I try to come up with a title is coming up with a title that is like the most obvious about my work. So it's called Lunch Plate because one material that I started working with for this work was a lunch plate, which is that blue part, plasticky part right there. And my hope for titling it that way is hoping that people can kind of move past it once they realize like, oh yeah, I mean, I see the lunch plate, it's the title is Lunch Plate, but there are so many other things going on. What can this work about? Like, what can it tell me? Or what are some of the other materials, colors, textures happening? Like, what's the meaning and significance? And I think over the years, the way I make hasn't really changed, and that I grab like a lot of different materials that are sometimes like found. So like the wooden piece that you see up top was actually a piece from like my school's wood shop in the scrap pile. So either students, faculty, or staff working in there thought that that piece was no longer of use to them, so they put it in the scrap pile, and I grabbed it. And there are certain items that I do purchase, like the lunch plate, which I got it from a dollar store, and various like mesh fabrics and different types of fabrics might be something that I get from me or my friends. Sometimes I get like items or like materials given to me by my acquaintances and friends because it's not of use to them, but I might be able to use it because I tend to kind of use a lot of different materials that are malleable and flexible to make my work. So I kind of think about my work in terms of existing like in between painting and sculpture, which I think a lot of us in the show might be thinking in a similar way, in that I kind of started out as a painter when I was in like, you know, college, when I'm starting to make work, artwork, but I think I kind of gradually, naturally moved into sculpture because I wanted to work with materials that are physical and materials that are actually like felt real to me. But the way I arrange colors or the way I think about composition sometimes very closely related to how a painter might think about mixing colors or combining colors and shapes. So this is a detailed image of a piece called Untitled 2019 because sometimes I don't know what to call my work, so I just say Untitled and I put a year next to it, the year that it was made. So I have been thinking in this way of like my work is about abstraction, it's about visual exploration, it's about using a lot of different materials to talk about only art and talk about nothing but art. But I think really coming, like making in the pandemic and teaching, I started to think about this idea of, okay, like what are material hierarchy, or like what do we value as artists and as like institution? What do we tell the artists, teachers, and students like what's more important? Meaning, I think there are times where, because I'm in education setting, like I see faculty kind of encouraging students to go for materials that tend to be pricey, right? Like more expensive, and kind of discourage students from using cardboard or what is considered to be cheap materials, because those are for tests. They're not made for making real art. And I started to think about like where did those hierarchies come from? Like why do we put value on things, and the things that we consider to be the best tend to be more expensive. So there is this innate like elitism that is embedded in it, and also this idea of like hierarchical, like capitalistic structures and systems, and how, you know, like education and art, it's all built on white supremacy structure. So this idea of like what's better and what's not. So I started thinking a lot about how I think about making my own work. So in that like making approaches, how I make hasn't changed in terms of like actual process of putting one material to the other, but selecting materials and how I think about my work after it has been made has shifted. So that's also one of the reasons why a lot of my materials are written next to the slides, but also when you see my work. So because I'm trying to be very transparent about what type of materials I use. So in terms of like, I also include screws that I use to install my work. And this is a view of my studio, just to give you a sense of like how my work is made, or where I make my work, or perhaps like where does my inspiration come from visually. I'm terrible at organizing my workspace and my living space in general, and this kind of chaos I think lends my like helps in my effort to create work in a way, like this type of like all this kind of what one could consider as trash all kind of combined together organically, that could lead me to thinking about, oh, how do I mix like wooden, plastic, hard materials with like soft fabric materials. So I tend to kind of let my studio space stay chaotic. It is both an excuse to not clean the studio space, but it also does help me. So this is how I let my workspace be and exist. And it kind of leads me to creating works like these, where this piece is called Diagonal, and it's made up of like a lot of different pieces that are kind of installed together and that are connected, either physically with yarn or like plastic lacing, but also visually by like distance or proximity, which I thought was kind of interesting because our show, Can I Sit Next to You, is about that kind of connection, like proximity, that is actually like really physical, but also proximity in terms of like our concepts and what we think about and what we talk about our work. I thought this was a good photo because it gives you a scale, because of that lovely dog who decided to sit right by my work. And this was pre-pandemic when I had a big studio space and able to create large pieces. And then when I shifted, like during pandemic, I like kind of ended up losing studio is not the correct word, although it might be correct in that like, like I couldn't get to my studio because there was like shelter in place, lockdown, and I was feeling like I couldn't like afford my studio. anyway. So I was kind of moving back with my parents and walking in their basement space to create my work, and really thinking about like adjusting based on the space I had, like adjusting in terms of scale. But I think that made me really appreciate small works too. So this piece called Long Orange, it's like 5 inches high and 12 inches wide, so it's very small. But I also think about how this piece compared to this piece, perhaps the impact or the message could be the same, or very similar, because I tend to work with very similar materials, just in a different scale. So I'm now interested in this way of like also hierarchy in terms of scale as well. So like small work being valued just as much than a large scale work. And how do we kind of shift that mindset of like bigger is better? So it has been a kind of like an interesting journey and a process for me as well. In this like when we were making in the middle of pandemic, even though it was very depressing and exhausting and emotionally isolating, I think it also gave me opportunities to really think about my practice going forward, and really think about like the importance of value, or thinking about like it was kind of liberating in a way, like you can make art virtually anywhere in any space. So that's where I ended up. So now I'm gonna turn it over to Nicole. Yay, thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Thank you, Loretta. I guess we're having it's happening. It looks great.
Is it happening? That's
Our
Jacin
technical
helping
issue
me.
is resolved. Oh, well,
To
whatever's
some
happening,
degree.
it looks awesome.
Yeah. I think Layden has blocked my access to sharing my screen. Let me first apologize again. Very hoarse voice. Not
Don't
COVID,
apologize.
but hey, it's something. So I typically start with the fact that I believe, and we are magical beings, and I define my practice as technology resistance magic, which can include, you know, your kind of typical spell casting, but can also include art making. So its point is to kind of awaken people and myself to a greater connection with the natural world and general principles of like truth, peace, equality. But at the same time, I think the work holds a kind of place for faithlessness, demanding a different type of future that we want, bending reality. So go ahead, Jacin, if you go to the next one. I kind of think of duality in the work, this kind of anxiety of the impossibility of, you know, the sense of belonging. As a species, we have not previously been compelled to create. And I think what you'll see here is maybe got a little overlapped, is that there's both the making of kind of preciousness in metalworks and craft and ceramics, but also the inclusion of kind of debris and trash and dust and dirt and litter. And so those kind of worlds kind of collide very bluntly. And I think that, you know, hopefully helps bring together these of wanting and believing while kind of the impossibility of it. So let's see what's next. Oh, I mean, yeah. And I grew up, like, I'll just say that I was surrounded by cypress swamps. Having an airboat as a child, I was always in the Florida Everglades. And I think the swamp holds kind of a place of this duality for me. It's neither land nor water. You know, it has a very shape-shifting quality. So go to the, you'll see me as a kid there. And then you'll see a couple surfaces. So that's kind of maximalness of dealing with surface. This group, funny enough, like I grew up looking at Jacin's work, not knowing him, and being really influenced by the idea of paint and create a deep surface with it, you know, and I don't know, metaphorically, a swamp for me. So the swamp really holds this place of mystery and like possibilities and myth making. The whole practice. I was about to graduate when the pandemic hit. Interesting experience to try to navigate a practice that you didn't feel like your kind of experience ended, but yet, you know, you're kind of forced to find your own way into a studio practice again during, you know, and so go ahead. Next slides. Let's see. This was the if you go to the, yeah, this was probably the last painting I got to do, maybe on the property of the institution. And this is, you know, a little, that it ceramics and like fiber work. But more recently, it's been, you know, getting away from frame and like really embracing different types of edges and different types of systems. As if you can just, can you guys hear me? Are you okay? Am I frozen?
You've frozen up a couple times on my end, but I'm getting almost everything. There's just a few moments where you got a little garbled, but you're good.
Yeah. No, I was just saying, like, you know, if you go to the next slide. Whoever. Okay, yeah. So you'll see that you know, the frame is kind of receded from the process, and these items are kind of holding their own places. In this image, you'll see like an introduction of different material processes with sigil making, and on the left is kind of like my personal notes in the studio. But included in the show was 4 different series, which I kind of just, you know, put a little page in there for you, that are ongoing in the Chicago studio. And I spend half my time in Chicago and half my time back in Florida, which I wish I was there now because it's 3 degrees here. And I'm missing all of you. But in the next, you'll see there's various pieces that got into the show through one way or another that are all in kind of different trajectories within my practice. So on the next, you can go to the next one. Yeah. So those are the titles. There's going to be a piece from like, there's going to be some, which I really like never thought I would show people. There's a couple pieces from Red Devastation series and a couple from Warrior Woodland Creatures. And these are all ongoing. They have a lot of friends back in Chicago that they miss, like in the studio, you know, object wise, because I feel like they're characters with each other. But just, and in the last slide, you can go to, Jay. Yeah, those, this group had kind of inspired me and convinced me to bring these like into viewership. These are warm-up small panels that I use to kind of have a space where I can do anything, feel as free as I want to do anything. And I guess I realized through this like material kinship that I could let them out of the studio, out of this like very safe space that I keep them in. So you'll see some of those too. And those really do, I think, speak to certain surfaces and certain buildup that I relate to with everybody's work. So work, I'm kind of excited, you know, to show you guys the rest. I will hand it off to the reason and the wonderful person into the show, Brandon Opalka.
Yay, Nicole. Brandon, I'll be advancing your slides, so just let me know.
Oh, Brandon, I think you're muted.
Hello. This is interesting. This is not the first slide. This is like, wait, I think he put, okay, I'm on live. So let me open up the window of the Google presentation.
That's our metaverse, Brandon.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, here we go. Well, I'm glad to be here, and I'm really excited about this exhibition. It was a lot of fun. And okay, so does that look good?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, for those that don't know me, I've been a part of the Miami art community probably since like 1998, and done various exhibitions from pop-ups to galleries to museums. And this was a really cool opportunity to bring some really talented artists together to showcase work in a unique way and try to combine ideas and, you know, motivations and things like together. And I guess really what I'm trying to say is like hang the work next to each other and not just give everybody like their specific area, but to try to collaborate, and how the work could create a new meaning by in which the way it was presented. And so this mural here, I did this one in 2009 on Emerson Dorsch, and it was inspired by a National Geographic photographer, Michael Nichols. It was the first time that a redwood tree had ever been photographed in its entirety. And it was just really special to me, I think, coming from Florida and like learning about the species that has been alive for 1,500 years and is still alive and has grown up as tall as 300 feet. And so I intentionally painted it sideways to comment on what we are doing as a species to the environment. And I've been inspired by nature probably ever since I started producing work. And this mural was titled after a William Blake poem, which William Blake writes, "But to the eyes of the man of imagination, nature is imagination itself. As a man is, so he is." And so it's titled Nature is Imagination Itself. And the reason why I put this slide in is just sort of to like give you an idea of my process of how nature has really been my main inspiration within my work. This is the fold out of the National Geographic, and that is the cover of the National Geographic. And there are some scientists taking measurements of the sort of circumference of the tree. These are some like other works, that the one of the painting on the 12 pack of Budweiser. This sort of work about recycled materials and using things that could be discarded on purpose to sort of have a dialogue with what we are doing to the environment. The one on the right is just something that I've been doing, layering canvases on top of each other, stitching them together, painting the back sides and the front sides of the painting. So when they flap open, you can see things from both sides. The intention there is to just show how we see things from both sides, and how there's things in the inside as well. This painting, Wanderwood, is an example of an oil painting. I started off as an oil painter in college, and this was inspired by some driftwood that washed up in California. I painted that mural of the tree back in 2009, and since then I had sold my house in Miami and moved to the redwood forest and lived in a right on the border of a state park that had redwood trees in my backyard. And I also took a lot of photos of walking along the coast and things that would wash up, and also things that were growing inside the ocean. Really beautiful species there. This is just more work to familiarize you guys with a little more of my stuff. I mean, my Instagram handle, Oppalka Studio, is definitely a really good way to get an idea of what I'm up to. These, you can see, have some airbrush on them. That's something new that I picked up recently. I did airbrush when I was in high school, but hadn't utilized it for probably 25 years. This painting's in the show. Took me a while. The embroidery of the painting was really fun, and it almost looks like coral, but the photo on the left is the actual trail that the painting's based on. And so I like to spend as much, if not more, time in nature than as I do in the studio. I feel like I enjoy my time in nature equally as much as I do in the studio. And without that information that I gather on these walks and hikes, I really wouldn't have anything to produce from. So I'm really stealing things on my journeys through these hikes and things. Unfortunately, that photo on the left of Marshall Trail is exactly where, not exactly, but close to probably 1,000 feet away where the Marshall Fire started. So I've been unable to go back since the fire happened to just kind of take more photos and check on my my special place. But it's a really cool piece, and I think we'll revisit it and go through slides of the exhibition. And that's it. And this is the next slide of some insanity. I think this kind of maybe just explains, you know, how we work together. How,
Okay.
yeah, and like how we've been communicating, you know, through this process of COVID. And if I even want to quote one of Evan's, the first sentence of the essay, it is a truly bizarre time to be human. Some of us have felt this way before COVID, but I think almost all of us feel that way since COVID. But I can continue. This is
Yeah,
a
and
slide we put together.
Mhm.
yeah, and Evan also asked some questions in the essay he wrote about, you know, how do we form new meaningful connections through exclusively virtual meaning during a global pandemic? How do we collaborate genuinely uh, across new virtual landscapes? I think with these questions, we can kind of go into just, you know, you guys can discuss how you began collaborating, how this all kind of uh, began to come together. You know, this almost exchange of material, ideas, feedback that put you all together. And do we want to share some of the images of
Sure.
the show?
So I can do the slide. So I shared the window with you. All right. I can go through as we talk.
Thanks, Loretta.
Yeah. So our well, I mean, I thought we would just begin with this metaverse image of us trying out this platform, maybe like a few days ago, or maybe even yesterday. And we thought it was kind of appropriate to start with this, in that the idea of like us first gathering together virtually. I know that, you know, like Jacin, Brandon, and Nicole go way back, and Jacin and Coe knew each other. Coe and I knew each other, but like 5 of us together happened virtually. So feels appropriate.
Right. I love this image. I think we all started laughing somewhat maniacally when this just happened. We're like, what? I just want to take a second to just remind folks who maybe have joined us in the interim to feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we can more kind of like conversationally address things, even like as they come to you. I think we'll kind of be able to catch things over there. And I know we kind of got some feedback that a lot of people weren't able to see the video. So there's a link to some of those on the side if people want to check those out. And I also wasn't sure, I mean, we can just kind of talk about it conversationally. But I feel like maybe some folks even like kind of were prepared to kind of give the story of how the show came together. So we can also just kind of like parse it out together.
Well, I mean, I don't mind giving a little startup of pre-pandemic. I went to Francis's studio at the Art Center on Lincoln Road and asked Francis if she would be open, or how to talk about, start a dialogue about doing a show with Jacin. I miss Jacin, and we used to share studios together in Miami a long time ago, and seemed like the perfect place to kind of get this together. And so that dialogue started, and it's developed to the 5 of us. And I don't know, it's been a great experience. These are some of the slides of us communicating to each other in an Instagram chat. We all flew into Florida to lay this out together and meet each other for the first time in some cases.
So I guess what I want to ask and drill down to is like, who made the first call? Who made the first email? Who sent a text? Who sent an image? What's going on here? We're talking about collaboration across digital landscapes. So I like, yeah, that's what I want to kind of figure out. Like, how did
Yeah,
that like get going?
right. Well, Jason
Brandon,
kind
it's
of reached out.
always very
Yeah,
that
Brandon really lit the
she is
fire.
just impermeates. Yeah.
But yeah, I was reached out. Jason reached out to me, and basically, kind of told me that you were talking to like one of your like closest, oldest art friends, and that the two of you had this opportunity to show a dimensions variable, and that you were both interested in not having a solo show or just a two-person show, but the more the two of you talked, you were interested in having a group show, because it kind of seemed at one point like the two of you could have just done a thing on your own, but that from what I remember, you kind of said to me like, no, like we're more interested in figuring out like, well, what can happen if more people are involved, and specifically just kind of like the impulse of jumping off of like people who work really intensely with materials based work. But you also said to me, and like it's a group show, like we're not telling you, like I'm not a curator, I'm not saying this is what the show is about, like I'm inviting you to figure out what this thing is with us. And I think that's been like a core impulse of the show, is that like a dynamic sort of like sharing of equity and leadership and openness to like chime in, refute, add on to, like everything is a very open discussion. And I think that's one of the things that I think sometimes could be exhausting in collaboration if there wasn't a lot of like equity around how that's going to work, or like a willingness to step back and be like, oh, like I'm none of us are gonna be taking over or getting our way all the time. This kind of like embracing of a real smushiness to how decisions get made, where one person's work begins and ends. And I think at some point we were like pushing even more on that, kind of like from a distance. So it's funny to talk about, I guess, like the paradox of the show also, that we're all in separate places while we're trying to also kind of like talk about like having these like strange boundaries between where our work begins and ends. But all of us are isolated during a pandemic. As I don't know if any other people have anything to riff off of with that, but I think that that's been like kind of something that I think Brandon in particular was really good at facilitating, like putting things in the mail and actually just like getting work into other people's hands before the show happened, so that we could have more material interplay. And like the work of mine on the back wall that's up on the screen right now, like I would not have made this piece. It couldn't exist without Brandon having sent me this fabric that I believe was like originally like maybe like a tablecloth from France. And you messaged me and just said, hey, I just saw this in my house, and like, it has paint on it already, so maybe we can't really use it as a tablecloth anymore. Like, do you want this? Could you do something with this? And I was kind of like, yeah. And before I knew, I swear it was like I blinked and it was at my house. You must have put it in the mail right that second.
I was trying to remove the evidence of ruining my wife's tablecloth. I didn't want her to see it. So
And then I put it on display.
yeah, and I also just want to say that like I think because I've worked collaboratively for a long time with Fake Co-op and some of my mural graffiti friends, that I'm not as intimidated by it like some might be, and so I just had to kind of trust in the process, and that we would like find ways to like pull this together. And I did see that there was energy coming from each one of you that really just wanted something to look forward to and sort of get involved in something. And I think that coming out of that isolation period of COVID and maybe even the lockdown and that kind of thing, all of these elements together really made this possible. So
Yeah.
thanks, COVID.
We're really digging for that silver lining. We're gonna find it. I don't.
Yeah,
Did
I
we,
think.
sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I was just thinking a little bit about the genesis, also of how we kind of came together, and it just occurred to me the more conversations I had with Brandon about the show, and um, you know, it just became so clear, like that we could make a stronger show with a bigger group, and Coe came to mind, when we met at grad school. And Coe was a professor there. I had gone back. I was getting my master's degree, and immediately, I had looked up Coe's work and saw these layered, uh, chunky rocks of paint that had get sawed apart, and so it was obviously love at first sight. And I figured, like, as we were talking about this show, uh, I just thought about how amazing it was. We had all of these between Brandon and Coe, and then when I started talking to Brandon about opening up the show a little bit, and Nicole's name came up, and there was just clearly so many kind of connections between a love of material, color, process, like these sort of like physical ways that we approached making stuff that also seemed equally clear that we thought we were all doing completely different things. Like, all of our
Yeah.
intentions were so different.
Yes.
And the way we read all of those elements were totally different, that it felt like an interesting opportunity to kind of have those tensions kind of built into
Mhm.
the show somehow, and see what ended up being a conversation
Yeah.
when you brought those differences together. So
Right. And
yeah.
even, I mean, there's things that I learned about y'all's work. I mean, we've been talking for almost a year remotely on like a pretty regular basis, and mostly like, I mean, talking a fair amount about mostly just work, but also like kind of like talking about life and how we're all coping, and kind of strategies for how we can kind of like keep going, and what feels good in an art making practice and what is possible right now. I know a lot of us have been um, had to move several times, or kind of not be in the same workspaces, or being strangely like kind of like between several studio spaces, because we keep having to like kind of go to one location and another to figure out like where we're going to be like more safe, or where we can help out a family member or a friend. And so those have been like a part of the conversation too, and a part of the parameters of like what made certain work possible and certain things not possible. um, and it's so fascinating though today to like get to hear certain things about everyone's work that I actually like we haven't talked about before. So I really loved getting to hear Loretta talk about the specific way in which like the lens through which she's viewing um, materials as like a way to push back against hierarchies, and kind of like extrapolating out of like a conversation out of materials, like conversations that kind of like reside in the politics of the way we misvalue all sorts of things. So I'm kind of curious to hear everyone, if people feel like there's space to kind of like keep parsing out those things more and more. And I'm curious too if like anyone felt like there were moments when um, I don't know, like you like felt a resistance to like this process of kind of um, pushing up against like I mean, I think like the fascinating thing for me about the show is that I honestly feel like we broke all these rules about who is supposed to show together, at least from like what I felt like I learned in my time period as someone who's kind of like done forays into curating and looks at art all the time and loves to go to shows. And I feel like I've kind of always told like, well, you don't put two works together in a show that are too materially similar, or too kind of like on face value similar, um, because you want to like add to a conceptual dialogue and not have things get lost in a materials sort of dialogue. And I feel like we're like, well, we know that that's what we're doing, but like what happens with this? I feel like we did like a very everyone seemed to be very open to the experiment, but I think everyone maybe even felt like the experiment was different from a different perspective. So anyways.
I think that's one of the things that attracted us about the project was how everything, in a sense, felt like it at an initial encounter, everything could blend together, and you're not sure exactly what you're looking at. And I feel like Francis and I really enjoy when we can see maybe two people that have been working independently that haven't necessarily spoken, and the work does that. But then we also enjoy conversations between artists that lead to that many times, because our own work, since we talk so much, always has aspects of each other in it. So that was one of the things that we loved about it, was this idea that you guys were talking to us about these clusters of pieces that were coming together, and you would, if you didn't take the time to get to know the practice, you'd sort of be lost, not understanding what you're looking at, and is it the same artist. And so I like that idea of taking the time, which we don't often do, to look and study and begin to understand like the different experiences, geographically, historically, sort of coming out visually in these exercises that can seem very similar, and I think it's very it's quite beautiful, and interesting to see that.
We did talk about identity in the process of this, and I think I learned a lot about that, communicating with each other, and like what it means to each one of us, like people's different definitions of identity, and whether we're willing to lose it or we're working on creating it and like identifying ourselves. And I think for hanging the works, yeah, like in these clusters, you don't necessarily know right away who made what. And for me, that was important.
Yeah. And I think it kind of really goes back to this idea of like Coe, you mentioned, and Layden, you too, about this. We were kind of taught, right, you don't want one work to be mistaken for another artist's work, or you don't put together things that are too similar in a show. And I think about, because I'm like thinking about the hierarchy all the time too, but it's this idea of how, like, especially in the US, the individualism is like so heightened, right? So this, I think that even comes through in art world when we install shows, this idea of like, this needs to be your own, like it's the original, it's the individual. So like you try to avoid people whose practice is similar to yours, but I actually think that like as collective, showing together, who we like share similar visual vocabulary, but also like concepts and like the way we are drawn to certain materials and tools, like how like we are taking through the show a moment to appreciate that collectiveness, or that this idea of that people who share our thoughts exist, right? I mean, I think that's why I appreciate about this exhibition, because I know in the past I also have been like, oh, I can't show with this people, or I can't show with this person, like I want to stand out. But I think through this there was a lot of letting go of those things, or fear of being mistaken, and embracing, no, it's actually great that you get like who made this, who made what, and then like get to investigate, right? Like how things are different, how things relate to each other, and how things are similar.
Loretta, it's like it's kind of a radical reassessment of fulfillment. Like what can fulfillment be? And there's, we're seeing it more and more that groups of artists are taking to like radical friendship, or like a radical kind of space where, you know, maybe our understanding of what like an art practice might have been taught to us, like in the market or in a white cube, or, you know, is really being taken on and reassessed, because it's just not like sustainable. It's not equitable. And you're right. Like I felt, you know, fulfillment was at like the core of finding out, you know, what was going to happen, what happened after a year. And I think Coe and I even spoke about like, this is just the beginning or something. Cause you know, we've only been able to learn like this much. How much would we be able to learn if, you know, this were to keep going?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I feel like it sounds like a cliche. I feel so dorky saying it, but honestly, I feel like this show was, and this isn't like a wildly different scenario for me in some ways. Like I'm always showing at nonprofit galleries. I'm always showing at artist run spaces. That this is like the world I have chosen to like pursue, to like, I think it's been the most enriching place to foster my work, is to connect with those sorts of spaces and those people. But this show has really felt similar in some ways to an environment of like being in school together with other artists, and an openness of what the dialogue is, and how somebody else is doing something, and is there something there that can kind of come into your world, and maybe have a different conversation or add to something in a different way. But it felt, you know, like I think I brought this up with y'all when we were talking recently. And I don't know if maybe for different people too in the show, like where it kind of hit you in the process of being in the show together. But I think it kind of hit me late in the game. Like it wasn't till we were like installing the work, or like the show was like really up in existence, that I was just like, oh, this whole process has really kind of been a stabilizing force through the pandemic. Why is that? Why does this feel different than typically after a show comes down? I feel like within like kind of artist circles, it's like, oh, we know that there's going to be like the after show blues. Like we're going to be like, oh, this big project that I've been carrying for so long is like over now. When sometimes it happens after you install it, sometimes it happens after the show comes down. But I haven't gotten any of those feelings with this show. And I know, like, I think we've kind of, just to bring it into the chat, I think we've kind of like addressed this question that Jordan's brought up, but we could kind of circle back and probably build on that some more, as far as like how we are handling like these connections between the work of colors. But I'm kind of curious, I think what Danielle is asking here is, will you all continue this equitable collaboration and exhibition when COVID ends? If so, does this process directly challenge the authority role of curators, gallery directors, and museums? I'm curious what other people think about that, or even if you have a response to that. Like,
You know, I just want to put it out there first. Like, I certainly, while I love, you know, the kind of premise of that, I wouldn't say that this kind of threatens any position of anyone's. Right. Because we, you know, we did struggle through having to organize ourselves in a curatorial manner. And, you know, it would have, yes, it could have been delightful for somebody to come in. But at the same time, it was really thrilling to see how we solved our own problems. But that's, you know, I don't think that, you know, kind of diminished the role of curators or gallery directors anywhere in the world. No,
right. Or it's like, it feels like more of like an and situation, where it's like, I feel like I need all these things. Yeah. But it is, I think it does feel noteworthy that this, due to the way, at least I was educated, due to the imposing nature of the way of the market, that I think that's something I learned during the show. Is I think like I'd done a lot of work to kind of like push back against those constraints, and I think I really realized that there were a lot of ways in which it was still really imposing upon me, and this show being one of them. That I was like, oh, I kind of isolated myself in my art practice because I've been told repetitively that like there's just all these ways in which you could connect with other artists and have a broader conversation, and that that was going to be bad for my work or bad for my career to kind of like have too much closeness in some of these ways. And I think I've realized kind of like early on that a big motivating factor for me of like why I even want to make things is to connect with other people and be a part of a community and be challenged by way of like having this like intermediary. I feel like we get to have really intimate conversations because we're talking about art and this object that's about a thing, instead of like, I can't just like traipse into a big empty room and start talking about my feelings, but give me an art object, I'm all in.
I mean, I feel like we're all about, in a sense, pushing back against some of those things mentioned in the question, and I would say partly yes, on questioning some of those roles. Like, you know, we always get asked every now and again if we're in conversations with, you know, with other curators or whatever, where it's like, well, I mean, what's your process? How do you guys, you know, and then artists sort of ask the same thing, and we're very hands off, and we're very much about respecting like the practices of the artists that we invite to do things, and then allowing them to envision their own sort of final creative decisions, which is the presentation, you know. And you know, and a lot of times I see a lot of exhibitions that do have that final creative process, which is the curator putting that into the work of the artist, which I sometimes feel goes, in my opinion, against some of the work that I'm looking at, and tries to do something else with the work that I feel like is outside of maybe what the artist was thinking about. I mean, and that's a whole other thing that we can talk about, but we're always very much about, and I think I remember early on having this conversation with Jacin where he was like, oh, all right, so do you guys want to like place things, or how do you want to, like, you know, and I was like, like, I'm not, you know, like, that's up to you guys. Like, you guys, you know, now if you ask me to comment and get more involved and have a say, I'm happy to, but I know, and this is coming from the dialogue that we have about our own practices, where whenever I'm installing, you know, my work or helping Frances install her work or whatever, there are very strong feelings about how that work should be encountered, how that work should be displayed. And a lot of times we don't feel comfortable with, even if it's constructive, or even if it's like whatever, it's like we're sort of very serious about that final step being part of the medium that the work is, you know. So that's kind of how we approach it, and I'm glad that you guys sort of had this, you know, experience of having to sort of come together and figure out, you know, because it's so hard, especially like looking at the show, you know, like there's all these clusters of works, and it's like just the decision to edit and put them together and have that dialogue. You know, it's quite the process. So
We pared down quite a bit too, and I think that was, you know, our pairings were pared down, and that was it. It was a challenge, like, you know, maybe you know, this kind of like trained aesthetic eye like would have done something differently, but I definitely think that it wouldn't have felt as respected as we were to each other. Like, we really took the time to consider, you know, what each other wanted, and what we both saw once the work was finally next to each other, because we had only been seeing it flat through like this, you know, digital stream. And this is all so physical. And it was all so good. It was like too good. And it was like overwhelming personally for me, because I was like, I can't. It's just too good.
I thought you guys would end up with more work actually in the space.
I think we were also like Nicole mentioned this idea of like there were so many good works and so many different possibilities of pairing and clusters and coming together, being seated next to each other. But we also wanted to like be mindful also in ways of dimensions variable, right? Like how y'all have been also showing artists in the past. So this idea of like collaboration within, at least for me, like for 5 of us, but also with you, dimensions variable, like how do we all kind of work together while kind of still satisfying our needs and wants and what we want to show. So I think that's why we were, you know, left with the work that we have in the show, but in a really great way. I mean, I think the compositions changed like every 2 hours for like first 2 days.
Yeah, we had time limitations in which we had to make these decisions because truly we could have sat there for a month together in real space with the real objects and the tactility of it and come up, you know, maybe with an entirely different show.
I mean, I would say you would have never finished.
Right. I think that's probably a good observation and a fair one. I will say that like to that question of like as far as like I think we've all talked about like well like what happens like do we want to do other iterations of this sort of impulse as a group together in other spaces? Might that sometimes include like other people kind of becoming part of the process? And I guess in my mind, if someone said like, you know, like you could have like whatever wish that I, you know, if I could have the time and the budget and like if all of our stars could align, when it is hopefully in the future a more safe and stable time in which, you know, there can be travel. I mean, ideally, I was like, you know, in some ways that week of installing felt more like an artist residency mixed with an install. So we were creating. It wasn't just like we have to put this on the wall and we have to figure out how it goes on the wall. I felt like we were creating a whole kind of installation in the space together. I think it would be really interesting to see like if we had a few weeks or a month to kind of extrapolate out that part of the process and be in a physical space together. Yes, it might never end. But I think it'd be really fascinating to see how much more we could kind of like push those boundaries of like where things can overlap maybe even more and where things need to kind of be in a different room, be in another space. I know there were so many different ideas also that we talked about before we actually got to get there. And I think Brandon had a lot of really exciting ideas about installing lighting that would be kind of like part of the show that was like colored lights and
Posters, music
posters.
Music posters.
I think we talked about like custom pedestals. Like there's a lot that we were like, yes. And then we're like, oh, we got to dial down. We got to dial back.
Colored lights, that's a thing. What I also like to see is a little bit of like, and I'm thinking like I love like just completely like stepping back and then seeing what happens because like you know it makes me like I see the clusters very much at like eye level, right? And I'm in and I'm always like, oh wow, that's interesting. Like they're thinking of you know these exercises in you know as paintings and they're sort of wanting to cluster at a very kind of eye level and maybe not thinking about like oh well let's just do away with like space altogether and maybe like move out into like you know and like forget about this sort of like viewing angle or you know we were thinking about these things when we hung like a kids show for the other day, and it was interesting because some of the works we hung really low, and we're like, wow, this is like total toddler eye level, and this is kind of cool. And I don't know, just that exercise of like how one views something at what height, and how you engage it, particularly like thinking about, like Brandon's use of like stones in some of the paintings and how that relates to earth, and thinking about the ground, and thinking about the level in which that might exist, putting you in contact with earth, and like all those kinds of ideas. So yeah, it's interesting always to see how things come together.
I think like when you see some of these works too, I mean, I'm thinking of like the concept behind like some of these works really standing alone on their own, but then being forced into this grouping, and forced in like a pleasurable way, because I don't think anybody, we like listen to each person's opinion on what they thought about like how the things were laid out, but just I don't. I guess I'm relating it to sort of like this pandemic that we've gone through together, and how this time period that we're going through is, you got to think outside of yourself these days. It's not always about what you want. It's about what like is good for everybody, and I think that that's something that you might not understand when you first walk into the show, but it's something that I find was intentional for my purpose of the way things were laid out, to kind of like bring that up. And it's also in the title of Can I Sit Next to You, developing from this idea of not wanting to be next to someone because of they may be contagious. And then this is just like embracing the contagion, like we are going to make this work regardless. Because a lot of the works would look great by themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
I think, yeah, just to riff on that, I feel like we're in some ways just kind of scratching the surface of like kind of some of our impulses of things that we talked about, as far as, and some of it I think is like, yeah, like the constraints of even like the size of some of the work and where it was traveling from. But I think something we were all kind of initially excited about is the idea that if someone's piece, of course, is like much larger or is able to do an installation on the whole wall, then somebody else's work or various works could kind of almost like be installed within that work. And like, is there a way that you could ever make that balance work, where something is not entirely enveloped by the larger work, that there is some sort of like they could hypothetically exist and own their own kind of internal logic and dialogue, and have somebody else's work who has a different internal logic and a different dialogue come in there and hang out. And I do think, like, to speak to the idea that like I think Layden and Loretta and a few other people maybe mentioned, like, it does require a viewer who is going to hang out and want to like parse out those differences, and perhaps also like some context provided by the space, where it's like, okay, well, like if there's certain people coming into this show who really know like Brandon's work, really know Jacin's work, really know Nicole's work. I mean, I think you were like the Miami people. I think you had more viewers who were like kind of knew the full history of the work, that there's this deep history of knowledge coming in. But for someone kind of coming in who maybe doesn't know any of our work, the ask of the viewer is kind of like, yeah, like hang out here a long time, have a seat. you're gonna have to you could appreciate these for like face value of kind of like, these are beautiful colors, they like just have like a lusciousness and an exuberance and all these like formal qualities. But if you really are going to get to know this work, you think you still can access those things, but I think it does require a little bit more time than even it does in other curations, where the conversation is a little bit more overlapping.
And I think that kind of makes me think back to your observation, Layden, about how you expected there would be even more work installed. But I the work itself, each piece feels as if they're all so dense. There's so much going on that we do want you to start to draw those connections, take time to figure out why these particular pieces are grouped together. And in consideration of that, you need some space, right? There needs to be a little bit of breathing room between, as a way to kind of focus attention on and time. I feel like on giving the work, it's the necessity that it requires there. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember seeing some pieces of there were outtakes that I was like, no, that's not going in. Why not?
yeah, there was. I
Megan,
think that
you
was
can give
all we
us-
all.
Sorry, if you just, schedule us for next year, who knows? We might get those pieces back.
I
Yeah.
do think that was part of the process. I feel like all of us kind of came to terms with, to one extent or another. It's like we all had pieces that maybe we thought were going to work or we were excited about, and in the end, it really was about like, well, what does that piece work with, or does it work with anything, or does it work with these other groups, or so it was about what was best, obviously, for the show in the end. So not about individual works.
There was some work that had to be done to get Brandon to bring back that painting. Brandon was like,
somebody told me like, oh, Brandon doesn't want to show this piece. I was like, what? That one's good.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot going on, and I think that it was fun to find the harmony amongst all of us. I think that there was a certain alchemy that we needed to discover within ourselves, and like we needed to like dig out some of our own feelings about participating in this project. Maybe one day you felt one way, or even an hour ago you felt one way, and something someone said helped you get through it, or something someone did, or just like some acknowledgement. And it was a very human experience, and I think that is what makes it special, because a lot of exhibitions are so planned or they're so promoted, and you just like feel like you've already seen it or been there before the shows even open these days. Just maybe because you're so familiar with what to expect from a particular artist or a particular group. And I think a lot of the magic in this was that there was a lot of unexpected decisions that were gonna happen.
That's really
last
beautiful
minute.
too, because if you think about trying to promote joy within like this lifelong practice, where you find yourself almost tired of, some of the motions that you've been going through within, or, within your studio space, or within, a kind of like a gallery setting. I think this really did kind of prove that you can keep like joy and newness. Like if you just take the risk of, like jumping into something with 5 people, it can like invigorate, the energy that you bring back to, say other projects. And it could be a good example for all artists,
right.
on how to keep joy.
Yeah, I agree, and I mean, I think as a teacher, it is something that I feel like this is something that I think could be brought up more in an educational setting, about how community really functions amongst artists, and how you sustain something together that ultimately is oftentimes very financially challenging and has a lot of time, emotional labor demands, and also like a lot of rewards, but sometimes those things feel like they're getting like kind of lost or pulled away. And I'd also have to say, like, I couldn't do this with just anybody. Like, I think that there was something amongst all the difference within this group. There was like a shared intentionality of at least like a real dedication to like, let's make this work together, and understanding at least like a a way of sharing the labor of putting a show together that I think spread like a lot of goodwill between us. You know, it's a lot of work to put a show together, and I hope that no one here, I know I never felt like I was carrying anything all on my own. And oftentimes when a problem was presented or a concern, somebody, if not various other people in the group, were like, let's talk that through, or let me actually do something to like help you resolve that issue. Most of my work, I don't know how I would have even gotten it to Miami if Brandon didn't think like, hey, I can just swing by Memphis on my way to Miami and pick your work up, and helped me pack everything up. And he stopped and got Nicole's work in Chicago, right? And I think Jacin and Loretta kind of collaborated on those things also, of like, how do you do those parts of the show? They're not the fun parts of the show, but it actually ended up being kind of fun. That could have just been me figuring out how to, take all my stuff to, FedEx and pay thousands of dollars to ship it. And it's like a kind of a nightmare. And also like, it's not possible financially to do that. So there's like a lot of similar intentions and equity amongst the group that I also hadn't experienced before. I've certainly been involved in collaborations or group shows before where it was like, kind of felt like there was a lot of work being done by some people, and maybe some people not engaging in that work, or somehow having a feeling that like they're above that sort of labor, which offends my blue collar working class sensibilities.
I think a lot about like the art of suffering too, and how like these moments of struggle are like the more memorable ones, the ones that like really help shape your future, and like really help understand and like not take for granted, how things are going in one's life. And so when I think of like hiking and stuff, like the other day I went up, it was a 4-hour hike, and I didn't even make it to the top of the mountain. And when I was coming down, I realized, you know what, like if I made it to the top, I might not want to go back. And the fact that I couldn't make it makes me want to go back and try again. And I think once you do reach that mountain, you try to find another mountain, and you attempt that. If you live your life where you're going to just continue doing the easiest trajectory possible, it's really not a pleasant place for growth, so there is a little bit of this understanding of and sensitivity to, like, you might not always get your way, or it might not always work out, but that's just part of life, and that's part of learning.
Awesome. And with that, I think that's a nice way to close this out, guys.
All right.
Thank you so much for getting together to do this. I think this was
Thank
great.
you.
You're
And
welcome.
shout out to Jason for picking us all up from the airport and bringing me a snack.
And we're super excited for January 28th and having you guys back here. Brandon, you coming, right? Hopefully all of you guys.
We hope so. We hope so.
Will come back. It should be fun. And, we want to get people out that haven't been able to make it by. So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You all.
Yay.
We'll see you all
Have an
soon.
amazing Saturday.
Take care, everyone. Have a good weekend.
All right.
Bye.